Her daughter-in-law leaned over the birthday cake and whispered, "Only the good die young, huh?" By morning, Ruth Elkins had pulled the land deed, the will, and every access code from Tara's future. She'd spent 60 years building her life. Tara spent one night trying to end it. Now, every document bore a new name, not yours. And when Tara finally knocked on her door, the locks had already changed. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The frosting was piped in soft swirls, too neat to be from anyone with real warmth in their hands. Ruth Elkins stood at the head of her farmhouse dining table, the summer light filtering through the lace curtains, casting slow-moving shadows across chipped porcelain and hummingbird napkins. Her heart ticked steady beneath her blouse, not from age, but from calculation. Tara was already performing. She held the knife like she'd practiced, grinning for Sadie's phone camera while slicing through the cake with theatrical precision. 3 layers, she announced, turning it so everyone could see the inside. Chocolate ganache, raspberry jam, and something Ruth couldn't name but didn't trust. "Oh, Tara, this looks delicious," murmured one of the neighbors. Ruth smiled politely, her fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table. She always knows how to make things memorable. Tara turned to her, eyes gleaming under mascara too thick for a family gathering. She leaned in just enough for only Ruth to hear, breath warm with wine and sugar. "Only the good die young, huh?" Ruth blinked. Once, then she smiled wider. "You first, then." Tara laughed like it was a joke. Maybe to her it was. Sadie caught the exchange with narrowed eyes. Her grip on the pitcher of sweet tea tightened for a beat, but she said nothing. The cake was passed out. Ruth accepted a plate. She didn't touch it. Later, after the guests had gone and the air had cooled into evening, Ruth stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes when she heard the knock. 3 soft taps. Purposeful. Familiar. Maggie Trent, pharmacist at the town's only clinic, and the kind of woman who never wasted a visit, stood in the doorway holding a paper bag of medication and a face like someone who'd seen something wrong but couldn't yet name it. "I didn't want to wait till tomorrow," Maggie said, stepping inside. Ruth dried her hands. "What happened?" Maggie set the bag down on the counter, her voice low. "Tara came into the pharmacy this morning, said she was just picking up your refills. Then she leaned in and asked, casual as can be, what would happen if these pills accidentally got doubled?" Ruth didn't blink. "Cardiac meds?" Maggie nodded, throat tight. "I told her dosage questions need to come from the patient. She smiled and said she was just curious." "She's always curious about things she has no business touching," Ruth said. Her voice carried no shock, just confirmation. Maggie hesitated. "I know we're not blood, but I've known you too long not to say something." "You did exactly right," Ruth said, turning toward the cabinet above the fridge. She reached high, fingers brushing past dusty cookbooks and forgotten vitamins until they landed on a slim fireproof envelope. She pulled it down, opened a side drawer, and handed Maggie a pen. "Document it. Date and time. Everything she said." Maggie's pen barely paused on the paper. "You want me to call the sheriff?" "Not yet," Ruth said. Let her feel safe a little longer. When Maggie left, Ruth walked slowly back to the dining room. The birthday banner still hung across the mantel, sagging slightly in the middle. Balloons hovered near the ceiling like sleepy witnesses. On the sideboard, the cake sat beneath its clear plastic dome, untouched since she'd set it down after the guests left. Ruth opened the lid, breathed in the artificial sweetness of boxed mix and store-bought jam, and set it beside the trash bin. She didn't even slice it again, just dropped the entire thing in with a single motion, the thud soft but certain. Then she turned and walked to her bedroom, where a locked filing cabinet waited beneath the window. She unlocked it, slid open the top drawer, and pulled out 2 files, one labeled Medical Directive, the other Will. Original copy in her late husband's handwriting. She laid them flat on the bedspread, the edges crisp, untouched. Time to revise what could be taken, and who'd be buried by the attempt. The family land deeds smelled like dust and time, like the truth you store under layers of polite neglect. Ruth laid it flat on the kitchen table beneath the glow of the overhead lamp, her hands slow but firm. The parchment edges were worn from years of touching and retouching, but the ink was still clear. 17 acres. Elkins property, title holder. Ruth Agnes Elkins, sole owner, no shared rights. No heirs listed. Tara must have assumed she was already halfway to the title. Just a few birthday toasts, a little overpouring, and a quiet mistake with medication away from it sliding into her hands. But Ruth didn't do assumptions. She did paperwork. She picked up the rotary phone mounted to the wall, its spiral cord stretching like a vein, as she dialed a number she knew by heart. Barlow Residence, came the voice on the other end. It's Ruth. We need to meet. Just you and me. A pause. Then Frank Barlow's deep voice responded, steady as ever. My office. 10 a.m. tomorrow. Ruth hung up without another word. Frank's office was a room inside his home above the post office, a dim, wood-paneled space with one window and a desk heavy enough to anchor a marriage. He didn't offer coffee, just handed her a pen and opened a fresh legal pad. I want everything Tara and Aaron thought they had to be erased, Ruth said, permanently. Frank raised a brow. You want to reassign the estate? I want it airtight, she said, and I want it quiet. He nodded, already flipping through her file. The deed's clean, no joint ownership. You can reassign without informing them. Good. You thinking of putting it into a trust? She smiled, thinking about planting it where their hands won't ever reach. Frank chuckled, then stopped when he saw she wasn't joking. By the time Ruth left, she had legal drafts in her bag, and one final question answered. Everything she planned to do was not only legal, but irreversible with the right signatures. That afternoon, she texted her granddaughter, Ruth, can you help me scan a few things tonight? Sadie, of course. Bring snacks? Ruth smiled. Always. Before Sadie arrived, Ruth went to the hallway cabinet, the one Tara had reorganized just last week under the guise of helping, while humming too loudly. Ruth pulled out her heart medication, the real ones, and moved them to her sewing box in the bedroom closet. In their place, she lined up identical pill bottles, filled with half doses and harmless vitamins, labeled just convincingly enough to fool someone looking for a shortcut. Let them double that, she thought. When Maggie arrived later, she brought not just the affidavit Ruth requested, but a witness, the pharmacy intern who'd been stocking shelves when Tara asked her question. Maggie had him sign beside her. It's notarized, she said, holding it out, just in case. Ruth took the folder without comment, but her nod held the weight of a woman laying down bricks for a wall no one would see coming. That evening, Sadie came over in pajama pants and slippers, hair in a bun, and laptop slung over one shoulder. You don't usually ask for help, she said, booting up the scanner. I'm asking now. They sat side by side at the kitchen table, the glow from the scanner slicing across documents, illuminating trust transfers, land revisions, affidavits, and a newly drafted power of attorney. Sadie didn't ask questions, but her eyes lingered on the names listed under removed beneficiaries. Her father, her mother. You're sure? She whispered. Ruth stared at the screen. Dead sure. Frank called, just after sunset. Ruth answered on the first ring. It's done, he said. Aaron and Tara are no longer beneficiaries. As of tonight, they don't inherit a square inch. Ruth looked out at the tree line beyond her kitchen window, where the moonlight barely touched the pines. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just said, good. Then she walked to the hallway cabinet, opened it one last time, and turned every false pill bottle label to face forward, lined up like bait. The roast smelled too sweet. Brown sugar and cloves layered thick enough to drown out anything real. Ruth stood in the doorway of her own kitchen, arms crossed loosely, watching Tara bustle between burners with the flurried charm of someone trying too hard to appear natural. You just sit, Ruth. Let someone else serve for a change. Tara called over her shoulder, stirring sauce with one hand while opening a bottle of red with the other. You've earned it. Ruth didn't move. I've earned a lot of things. Still waiting on most of them. Tara laughed too loudly. Oh, you're always so funny. She poured wine generously into Ruth's glass first, then her own. The bottle was new, unopened, but Ruth noted the absence of a label. No vineyard, no barcode, just a crimson neck and an overly eager pour. Aaron walked in from the den, thumbs glued to his phone. "Dinner ready?" he asked without looking up. Tara answered for both of them. "Almost, babe. You want to carve the roast?" "I'll eat it." "You carve it," he mumbled, dropping into a chair like gravity owed him something. Sadie helped set the table, forks polished, napkins folded tight like envelopes. Her gaze flicked toward the wine glasses, and then to her grandmother, just long enough to catch the unspoken message. Ruth sat, folded her hands, and waited. Tara brought the plates over with a flourish. "Nothing but the best for our matriarch," she said, placing Ruth's in front of her, like it was a gift wrapped in deceit. The glass of wine followed. "Helps you sleep, right?" Ruth raised her eyes, calm and unwavering. "Funny you ask. How I sleep depends a lot on how safe I feel." Tara chuckled nervously. "Well, here's to comfort then." She raised her own glass. Aaron joined half-heartedly. Sadie hesitated. Then, like a magician with a minor trick, she leaned forward to adjust Ruth's napkin, and in the same motion, switched the two identical glasses. Ruth didn't blink. Dinner passed with empty chatter. Tara talked about yard renovations she never started. Aaron barely responded, and Sadie observed like it was a science project in slow motion. Ruth said very little. When dessert came, over-sugared cobbler, Ruth excused herself early. "Tired already?" Tara called after her. "Didn't even finish your wine." "I don't sleep like I used to," Ruth said, her voice steady as a locked drawer. "But I try to keep habits that keep me alive." In her bedroom, Ruth sat on the edge of the mattress, watching the shadows change on the wall as dusk settled into night. Then she reached beneath the dresser, pulled out the small black camcorder she'd kept since Sadie was in elementary school, and placed it on the bookshelf across from the bed. Quiet, high angle, no blinking light, just enough storage for 8 hours. She slipped between the covers and feigned exhaustion, one hand resting gently atop her chest, fingers near the emergency remote hidden under the pillow. An hour later, Maggie stopped by under the guise of a late delivery. "New batch. Pharmacy sealed, and I triple-checked." Ruth examined the blister packs. "Sealed. Labeled." She nodded once. "Thank you, Maggie. You're sure you want to stay here tonight?" Ruth looked down the hallway where the light from the kitchen still leaked out, too warm and too quiet. "I want her to feel safe enough to try again," she said. "It's easier to catch a spider once it spins the web." At 2:11 a.m., the house creaked. Old wood. Subtle. At 2:13, the bedroom door opened. Ruth's eyes remained closed. Breath shallow. Still. Tara stepped inside on socked feet, a small glass in hand, still half full, still red. She stood beside the bed for 7 seconds, long enough for Ruth to smell the bitter scent of grape and something chemical. Tara didn't say a word. Then she turned and crept back out, closing the door behind her, with care only guilt can manufacture. Ruth waited until the latch clicked. Then she opened her eyes. The frame didn't shake. The lens didn't blink. But the silence inside the room, caught on camera, felt like breath held too long. The camera caught her eyes, watchful, calculating. Ruth didn't stir. She breathed evenly, her body still, her eyelids gently shut. Tara looked down at the glass, then at Ruth. Then, after 9 seconds, just long enough to raise questions but not proof, she turned and walked out, closing the door behind her. Ruth opened her eyes the moment the latch clicked shut. By morning, the house smelled like cold toast and spent intentions. Sadie showed up with 2 travel mugs of coffee and a brown bag of cinnamon muffins. She walked into the kitchen like it was routine, but dropped the bag the second she saw Ruth's face. Ruth didn't speak, just held up the camcorder. They watched the footage on the tiny screen, huddled over the table, When the moment played, Sadie's knuckles went white around her cup. "She's really trying to erase you," Sadie said, her voice small but furious. Ruth hit pause on Tara's face. "Then let's give her something to try and delete." By noon, Ruth was at Frank Barlow's again. This time, she brought her own pen. "I want the farmland set aside now," she said. "Revocable but with intent. Assign it to Sadie. Make it legal." Frank blinked. "You're sure? She's the only one who's looked out for me without checking the account balance first." He nodded slowly, opened a thick leather binder, and began typing. "I'll word it carefully," he said. "They won't see it coming, and even if they do, they won't be able to touch it." Back at the house, Ruth changed every interior lock, replaced her bedroom door with one that bolted from the inside. She moved her daily pillbox to the barn freezer, beneath frozen bread loaves no one would ever touch. She even rewired the front porch camera to record continuously, not just when motion was detected. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was watching. That evening, the sun dipped below the pine line, draping the fields in golden hush. Ruth sat on her porch with her hand resting lightly on a folded manila envelope, the footage copied and sealed. Evidence, if needed. She didn't jump when tires crunched up the gravel drive. She already knew the car. Deputy Joel stepped out, his boots kicking up dust. He didn't ask why she'd called. She didn't offer coffee. Instead, she stood, smoothed her sweater, and handed him the envelope. "Something you'll want to look at," she said. "Footage is time-stamped. There's a notarized statement inside, too." Joel accepted it with both hands, careful not to crease it. "You feel threatened?" Ruth's face didn't move. "I feel prepared." He nodded, jaw tight. "Anything else you need from me?" She glanced at the porch camera, the barn, the acres behind her that Tara would never truly walk without permission again. "Not yet," Ruth said calmly. "But we might need you soon." Joel looked her over once, respectful, cautious, then walked back to his cruiser. The moment his engine faded, Ruth exhaled. The next step had already begun. Ruth stood beneath the sheriff's office seal like it was a courthouse cross. The scent of old paper and cheap coffee lingered inside, mixed with the musk of mud tracked in from steel-toed boots. She didn't ask where to go. She already knew. Deputy Joel greeted her with a quiet nod, shutting the door behind her once they stepped into his windowless office. She didn't waste time. From her leather handbag, Ruth pulled out 3 manila folders and laid them down like playing cards. First, the camcorder footage, time-stamped, labeled. Second, Maggie Trent's notarized affidavit, in blue ink. Third, her updated medical directive, signed last week by her doctor, certifying her mental clarity and full cognitive function. Joel looked them over without speaking. She folded her hands in her lap. "I'm not accusing yet, but I am documenting, and I want it on the record." He nodded slowly. "We'll open a file, quietly. I won't escalate until you tell me." "Good," she said. "I'm not lighting the match. I'm just soaking the wood." That afternoon, Frank Barlow's printer buzzed like a cicada in heat. Legal documents rolled out onto his desk, one after the other, each cleaner than the last. "Property protection orders filed," he said without looking up. "That means neither Aaron nor Tara can sell, transfer, borrow against, or rezone your land without written consent, including that storage shed you never wanted built." Ruth nodded. "They won't see it coming." Next up, the estate. He slid a printed packet across the table. "Probate update. Formal declaration that Sadie is now primary heir, pending your passing. Fully revocable, fully legal. Once it's on record, they'll be blocked from contesting it without cause." Ruth pulled out a pen. "Black ink, right?" Frank smiled faintly. "Always." By sundown, she was at her old desk, the one with the cracked drawer and worn brass handles, pulling up her last joint account, Elkin's Legacy Fund. It was once meant for shared family medical emergencies, educational costs, and long-term home repairs. But Ruth knew better now, knew exactly who had accessed it in the last 12 months without her full consent. She clicked twice, entered her passcode, and hit freeze account. A satisfying beep chimed from the screen. Across town, Tara's phone buzzed. Declined. Within 10 minutes, Tara burst into the bedroom she shared with Aaron, waving her phone like it had bitten her. "What the hell is this?" she barked. "I just tried to transfer the power bill, and it says the fund's frozen." Aaron was half asleep, scrolling, his glasses still on. She shoved the phone in his face. "Did you know about this?" He blinked, then looked back down. "It's her money. She can do what she wants." Tara stared at him like he'd confessed murder. "She's cutting us out, and you're just lying there like a slug?" Aaron didn't respond. Tara slammed the door on her way out. The next morning, Ruth checked her mailbox early. A chill hung in the fog, curling around her ankles like it meant something. The card was wedged between grocery flyers and a gardening catalog. Pale blue envelope. No handwriting on the front. Just her name, typed neatly. Inside, a Hallmark card with daisies, and the words "Get well soon." No signature. She stared at it for a long time. No smell, no return address, no fingerprints obvious, but her gut knew better. She slipped it into a plastic sleeve and filed it in the folder she now kept behind her locked cabinet drawer, marked in red ink, "In case." Just beneath it sat a smaller folder marked Tara, sequence initiated. Ruth didn't smile. She simply stood, went to the stove, and turned off the kettle that had already gone cold. The envelope had no return address, no scent, no smudge of perfume or fingerprints, just a machine-perfect label. Ruth Elkins. But inside the card, the handwriting curled with effort, each letter a little too careful, like someone trying to copy kindness. Ruth placed the card on the kitchen table and slid a yellowed recipe card next to it. Apple bread, written in Tara's hand a decade ago for a church potluck. Same looped G, same closed top A, same slanted downstroke on the Y. Sadie stood over her shoulder, arms crossed. "You think it's her?" Ruth asked. Sadie didn't blink. "It's her, no doubt." Ruth nodded once, then slipped the card and envelope into a plastic sleeve and slid it into the locked accordion folder labeled "Sequence Initiated." Secondary triggers. The edges barely fit. Tara's tone changed the next morning. "Sadie, honey, can I talk to you?" she asked, planting herself in the hallway, like she'd just remembered she was maternal. Sadie, dressed in her hoodie and ready to leave for her shift at the bookstore, paused. "You know," Tara began, fiddling with the charm bracelet Ruth had once given her. "I keep thinking about how this house, this land, it'll all be yours one day. I mean, the way things are going." Sadie raised an eyebrow. Tara pressed on. "I just hope you know your dad and I, we only want what's best for Grandma. It's a lot to manage. She's old. She forgets things. That's all we've ever meant." Sadie gave a little shrug. "I'll keep that in mind." And with that, she walked out the door and texted Ruth word for word what was just said. Maggie met Ruth behind the pharmacy counter after hours, door locked, blinds drawn. The quiet buzz of the fluorescent lights made everything feel off script. "I pulled the footage from last Tuesday," Maggie said, sliding over a USB stick. "It's got sound." She wasn't asking for a refill. She asked what would happen if your dosage was accidentally bumped, like she was just curious. Real nonchalant. Ruth held the stick in her palm like it might burn through. "Did she pay with a card?" Maggie nodded. "Time-stamped, matched to her Chase debit." "Good?" Ruth said. "Very good." That evening, Ruth sat at her roll-top desk while Frank's voice hummed through the speakerphone, the clack of his keyboard steady and sure. "I'm drafting a cease and desist," he said, "specifically tailored to inheritance coercion and undue influence. It'll be polite, but legal. She can't say you didn't warn her." Ruth listened without interrupting, tapping a slow rhythm against the edge of the desk drawer. "Put this in your estate record," she said. Everything that follows will be her response to it. Just before midnight, Ruth's cell buzzed on the nightstand. A voicemail from Aaron. His voice was thin, a whisper too practiced. "Hey, Mom, she's really upset. She thinks you're turning Sadie against us. Says you've been acting different. I don't know what's going on, but maybe we should talk. Just us." before things go too far. Ruth didn't delete it, didn't return the call. She simply saved the voicemail into a labeled folder on her recorder. Aaron_weak_spine_01. And then, very slowly, she switched off her lamp and let the silence finish what he started. The morning sun poured across Ruth's dining table, but the warmth did little to soften the paper in her hands. The transcript of Aaron's voicemail sat freshly printed, its words clinical in courier font. Tara thinks you're turning Sadie against us, before things go too far. Ruth circled the phrase, go too far, with a red pen, then underlined it once, slowly, deliberately. She tucked it into a clear binder labeled verbal records, passive threats. The weight of it wasn't heavy, but it felt decisive. By noon, she was sitting in Dr. Keller's office, the sharp scent of antiseptic laced with pine cleaner. Her pulse was steady, voice clear. You're sure about the full panel? The nurse asked, glancing up from the clipboard. I don't want just blood work, Ruth replied. Cognitive too. Memory, reasoning, reflex, all of it. The nurse blinked. You feeling all right, Ruth? Perfectly, she said. That's why we're going to prove it. An hour later, Dr. Keller leaned back in his chair, impressed. You scored nearly perfect, he said. Your short-term and long-term memory both tested high, and reaction time? Better than most 60-year-olds. Ruth smiled without showing teeth. Put it on paper. He did, and within 2 hours, that report was scanned, uploaded, and placed securely in Ruth's estate file under capacity certification, undisputed. Deputy Joel's truck rolled quietly into the pharmacy lot that evening. He didn't wear his uniform. Just boots, jeans, and a button-down too clean for farm work. Inside, Maggie pulled him into the consultation alcove with a glance. No small talk. She asked about overdoses, Maggie said, voice low. And she didn't look confused when she asked. She looked prepared. Joel scratched something in his notepad. That security footage you gave Ruth, anything else on it? Maggie nodded. Timestamp, transaction ID, audio capture. No edits. Joel didn't say much, just nodded and stood. Before he left, he tapped the counter gently twice. She knew what that meant. Keep quiet, but stay alert. That night, Ruth changed the locks. She didn't hire anyone, just pulled the old brass deadbolt off herself, hands steady, light from the porch sconce catching the silver screws like miniature suns. By the time she finished, her wrists ached and her lungs wheezed, but the click of the new lock sliding into place was worth it. Only one spare key was made. It went into a small manila envelope and was hand-delivered to Sadie at the bookstore the next day. Don't lose this, Ruth said. I won't. And don't tell anyone you have it. Sadie tucked it into the lining of her backpack, eyes steady. Understood. Tara tried the front door later that week. The key jammed, then spun uselessly. From the porch, she muttered just loud enough for the wind to carry it. That old woman's paranoid. Ruth, watering her tomatoes nearby, didn't flinch. She just raised the spout and let the water run slow and purposeful. Better paranoid than poisoned, she murmured under her breath. That night, Ruth sat at her kitchen table, her breath fogging slightly against the glass of sweet tea. The form sat in front of her, legal, sharp-edged, and not meant for second thoughts. Petition for temporary protective order, suspected elder abuse and coercion. Signed, dated. Filed electronically with Frank's help and a quiet nod from Deputy Joel. The court order came back, signed in thick blue ink, its seal embossed deep into the bottom corner like a pressed bruise. Ruth held it steady in her hands as the wind moved the curtains behind her. The words were simple, clinical, temporary protective order, effective immediately. Tara Elkins was now legally barred from Ruth's property, from contacting her by phone or in person, and from handling or accessing any of Ruth's health or financial matters. The irony wasn't lost on Ruth. The same woman who'd crept into her bedroom at 2:13 a.m. with a glass and a performance smile would now have to stay 100 yards away by law. Good, Ruth whispered, folding the document into her records folder with a crisp snap. Tara was served 2 days later at Walker's Grocery, mid-aisle, between the pickled okra and the half-priced sandwich bread. The deputy didn't raise his voice. He simply approached her, envelope in hand. "Mrs. Elkins," he said calmly. Tara turned, halfway through a phone call, brows arched in her performative confusion. "Yes, you've been served. Please read the full contents before contacting any party named." She blinked. Then her smile dropped like a shutter. A woman at the end of the aisle turned to her husband and whispered something. Another clerk paused as he bagged peaches, eyes wide but silent. The town was small, voices carried, but silence sometimes did more damage. Tara stormed out without finishing her cart. She left a box of cake mix, buttercream frosting, and a bottle of red wine on the conveyor belt. Aaron came alone that evening. No warning, just the muted rumble of his Ford truck in the gravel and the creak of the front porch step. Ruth didn't get up. She stayed at the table, shelling peas into a wide metal bowl. She didn't look up when he knocked. "Mom," he said, through the screen. "Can we just talk?" "You've had months to talk," she replied, still shelling slow and steady. "What is it now?" He hesitated. "She's stressed, hurt. You know how she is when she feels cornered." Ruth set a pea pod aside and finally looked up. "Your silence said enough, long before the court did." Aaron opened his mouth to argue, but then closed it. The wind moved through the pines like a warning, and Ruth turned back to her peas. He didn't knock again. That week, Frank Barlow sent a draft. It wasn't legal paperwork, it was legacy. A polished, publication-ready profile of Ruth's life. Decades as a nurse, years volunteering at the library, the farmland she'd tended with her late husband, and the scholarship fund she'd recently opened for young women in rural medicine. "I took liberties with the title," Frank wrote in his email, "rooted, not replaced. Let me know if it lands." It landed. At the Literacy Center down on Main, Sadie began volunteering every Thursday afternoon. Ruth had donated anonymously to keep the center open after state budget cuts. But watching Sadie stack books and organize reading logs made it feel less like charity and more like legacy maintenance. "She's been tutoring the younger ones," one of the staffers told Ruth. Firm but kind, like someone raised by someone steady. Ruth didn't say much, just smiled the way pine trees do. Quiet but not soft. Tara, meanwhile, took to the internet. She posted on Facebook under the guise of prayer requests and vague sympathy seeking. "It's devastating when age takes away reason. Pray for my family as we navigate heartbreak." She followed it with a filtered picture of Ruth's house, captioned only, "Once was home." Sadie saw it within minutes, screenshot it, and texted Ruth. "She's unraveling online." Ruth replied with a single emoji, the scissors. That Friday, the phone rang just after sunset. Ruth picked up after the second ring. "Ruth?" Deputy Joel's voice was low but direct. "Yes? I have probable cause. If you're willing, I'd like to move forward with the search warrant request targeting digital evidence on Tara's devices." Ruth's hand moved slowly to rest on the folder labeled Protective Actions, Phase 2. Her voice was calm as ever. "I've been ready." The knock on the door wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Deputy Joel stood at the threshold with a folded document in one hand and a steel determination in his eyes. "It's signed," he said. Frank Barlow, standing beside Ruth on the porch, nodded once. "Then it's time." Joel adjusted his belt, looked toward the driveway where his cruiser idled in the heat, and added, "She won't see it coming." Ruth didn't blink. She only sipped her tea, steam curling from the mug. Neither did I. At precisely 10:06 a.m., Tara opened her front door wearing workout leggings and a half-dried smile. She froze when she saw the badge. Then the other officer stepping behind Joel with an evidence bag already prepared. "What is this?" she asked, arms folded. "A search and seizure warrant," Joel said plainly, handing over the papers. "Issued on suspicion of targeted elder endangerment and digital premeditation." She laughed, breathless and too high-pitched. "You've got to be joking. This is ridiculous." Joel didn't answer. He stepped inside, nodded to the other officer, and said, "Phone, laptop, any digital device in her primary use." Tara's face blanched. She opened her mouth, then shut it. Upstairs, a MacBook was lifted from a bedside table. Her phone was still warm in her pocket. She handed it over with fingers that trembled just enough to betray her. As Joel left, she shouted after him, Tell Ruth this won't end well, for any of us. He didn't turn back. That's what we're making sure of. Back on the porch, Ruth sat in her usual spot overlooking the pine line. The air was thick but still. She didn't ask for updates. She didn't need to. She looked at the wide acreage, the place her husband built with sweat and stubbornness. Her gaze followed the distant path Sadie had mowed last week near the oak line, curving just enough to dodge the blackberry bramble. You don't have to run when you're right, she murmured. Then she smiled, small, sharp, and entirely earned. That evening, a letter arrived in Sadie's email inbox with the subject line, "Congratulations." Her college of choice, one of the best liberal arts schools in North Carolina, had accepted her early decision with partial scholarship. Ruth printed the letter and placed it beneath a folder marked Fall Disbursement Plan, paid in full. She never told Sadie who wired the balance. She didn't need to. Instead, she placed a note beneath the envelope on Sadie's desk, "For the roots you'll plant elsewhere." The forensic review of Tara's laptop moved quickly. Search history included phrases like elderly overdose symptoms, but no autopsy. Can you die from too many beta blockers? How long do cardiac meds stay in the bloodstream? Quiet death for old women. Each phrase sat like rusted nails in a coffin she had tried to build from behind a polite smile. Frank forwarded the preliminary report to Ruth with one line. She didn't plan for you to outlive her searches. Tara was summoned to the sheriff's office 2 days later. She wore pearls and tried to cry. She called it concern, claimed her online searches were morbid curiosity, a leftover from watching too many true crime shows. Deputy Joel watched silently. Let her speak. Let the rope unspool. She left shaken, less from the questions and more from the realization they had more than suspicion. They had sequence, intent, corroboration. She didn't know Ruth had already sent Maggie's affidavit and the pharmacy surveillance footage to Tara's employer, along with a notarized timeline of every suspicious interaction. The HR firm where Tara worked prided itself on ethical review. Their logo was "We build trust for companies." That tagline would soon feel ironic. That Friday morning, a sealed envelope arrived at Tara's front door. No knock, just placed cleanly against the welcome mat. Inside, notice of administrative leave, pending internal ethics review. In the margin, someone had scribbled, "Until further notice, do not report to the office or contact any clients." Tara's hands trembled. Then she screamed and slammed the front door shut so hard it cracked the frame. Ruth stood barefoot in her kitchen, the morning sun angling through the sheer curtain above the sink, casting pale gold across the countertops. She was digging through the trash, not out of desperation, but purpose. There was something she needed to confirm, and she suspected it lay buried under 2 days of coffee grounds and damp napkins. And there it was, folded twice, stained at the edge with buttercream smudge. A receipt, Pineview Bakery. 9-inch chocolate ganache layer cake, $28.99. Timestamp, 1 hour before Tara claimed she'd been baking all afternoon. Ruth's fingers closed around the slip, and for the first time in days, she allowed a faint smile to tug at her mouth. "Liar," she muttered, but not even a thorough one. She added the receipt to a manila folder labeled Tara, Incident Trail, and slid it between Maggie's affidavit and the surveillance still of Tara beside her bed at 2:13 a.m. A story was taking shape now. Not in screams or arguments, but in paper. Dates, signatures, digital trails. Lies stacked like frosting, soft until you pressed with a knife. Ruth made a small note on her timeline summary, February 12th. Faux cake, coercive affection, gift as guilt buffer. The phrase fabrication of affection was one Frank had once used in a domestic coercion seminar. She remembered it precisely. Ruth always did. Later that week, Ruth stood before a circle of women at the Asheville Women's Legal Empowerment Group. The barn-turned meeting hall smelled faintly of lavender and old varnish, the floorboards creaking beneath quilted chairs. Ruth wore gray slacks, a blue cardigan, and a pin shaped like a stethoscope, a nod to her years as a nurse. On the easel beside her was a blown-up photo of the chocolate cake, perfectly piped, flawless in symmetry. "She said she made it for my birthday," Ruth said, voice even. but it came with the kind of sweetness that sticks in your throat. She passed the receipt around the circle. This, she tapped the printout, is how small the lies start, with gestures wrapped in ribbons, with smiles that expect a signature in return. Heads nodded. One woman dabbed her eyes. Another whispered, "Reminds me of my sister-in-law." When Ruth returned home that evening, Sadie was at the kitchen table with her laptop and a bowl of tomato soup. She glanced up, saw the expression on Ruth's face, and smirked. She really tried to fake a cake. Ruth hung up her coat. She never baked anything, not even her stories. Sadie chuckled, but there was a sadness to it. "It's wild, she spent all that time trying to replace you with a performance." Ruth reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind Sadie's ear. "That's the thing about acts, baby. They have curtains." The following day, Travis Baines stopped by with a thermos of black coffee and a hardware bag slung over one shoulder. "Thought you might want this," he said, lifting a small matte black motion trigger camera. "Spotted it at a farm auction last weekend. It's yours if you want it." Ruth opened the porch screen, took the camera, and turned it over in her hands. "How's the range?" 50 feet. Night vision. Sends alerts to your phone. Might catch more than possums." She met his eyes. "Might catch trespassers and pearl earrings too." They shared a short, quiet laugh. No need to say her name. The following morning, as Ruth sifted through the day's mail, she came across a letter bearing the return address of a law firm in Charlotte. Thick envelope. Cold font. She slid it open with her letter opener, unfolded the contents. "Cease and desist notice, Ray. Alleged defamation, character harm, and privacy violation. On behalf of Tara Elkins, Frank was already on his way over for tea. When he arrived, Ruth held the letter out to him like a limp napkin. "You might want to frame this." Frank skimmed it, blinked once, then handed it back. "You know," he said, "I've represented judges who've panicked less than she has." Ruth laughed deep in her throat. That's the sound of someone losing the plot. The wind picked up just as Ruth and Frank stepped out of the courthouse, the sky mottled and gray like brushed steel. In Frank's leather briefcase was a file thick with affidavits, timestamps, and transcripts. But what truly weighed it down, what gave it muscle, was the new cover page he had stamped himself that morning in firm black ink. Elkins v. Elkins. Formal complaint of attempted elder endangerment and fraud. Ruth didn't look at the paper. She didn't need to. Her name had weight now, not just on deeds and pill bottles, but in court. Frank adjusted his glasses and glanced over at her. "That cease and desist letter," he said. "Consider this your reply. Official, signed and filed." By the following Thursday, Tara's name was entered into the Buncombe County Court Registry as respondent, under active review. The registry didn't say guilty yet, but it said she was worth investigating. And that was enough to alter the tone of whispers in the aisles of the co-op, the back pews of church, and the checkout lane at Dollar General. Tara, once the cheery face of the church's family planning committee, suddenly wasn't on any sign-up sheets. Her smile flickered now. Her eyes darted. The facade had fractures. Ruth knew what it meant when people stopped making eye contact first. Guilt, like a cough, arrived before the diagnosis. Aaron, however, was still trying to sit in the middle of a burning bench. Deputy Joel interviewed him in his pickup truck outside the feed store. The windows fogged as Aaron stammered through every question. "Did your wife mention changing your mother's medications?" "No, I mean, she worried about the dosage, like from concern, you know." "Did she tell you about the cease and desist filed against your mother?" I don't think we got the actual copy. I was probably at work." Joel said nothing, just wrote the word uninformed in the margin of his notes. But later, when he called Ruth, he said quietly, he didn't lie. He just didn't care enough to know. Ruth nodded. That was worse. That Sunday, Ruth sat at her desk with a black pen and yellow pad. The hum of her space heater softened the edges of her thoughts. She was drafting her open letter to the town of Asheville, for the Sunday edition of the Mountain Sentinel. Her handwriting was firm, each sentence a scalpel. They always tell us to speak up before it's too late, but they rarely tell us how, or who'll believe us. I believe me. And if you're reading this, I hope you believe yourself too. Don't wait to protect yourself. Don't wait until your memory is the only witness. When the paper printed it in full, the letters poured in. One from a retired school teacher who'd noticed her daughter-in-law swapping mail from the box. Another from a man whose nephew kept pushing for power of attorney, just in case. And a third, unsigned, simply said, "Thank you for proving quiet doesn't mean weak." Sadie found Ruth folding the letters into a cloth-bound journal. She slid down beside her on the couch, arms tucked under her knees. "You made it safe for me to speak when I'm old," she said softly. Ruth didn't smile. She didn't cry either. She just reached over and squeezed her hand, bones pressing gently against skin. "That's the whole reason I'm still here." Later that night, Deputy Joel called. His tone was low and certain. "The DA's office is reviewing everything. They may pursue charges formally." Ruth blinked slowly. "Do they need anything else from me?" "No, ma'am. Your paper trail's cleaner than a banker's file." On Tuesday morning, an envelope arrived by courier. No return address. Frank opened it at the kitchen table while Ruth poured coffee. His brow rose. "It's a pre-settlement offer," he said, holding up the stapled packet. "She wants to resolve it all quietly. No charges. No press." Ruth stirred cream into her mug. "Of course she does," she murmured. "But she doesn't get quiet anymore." The envelope sat unopened for 3 days, on Ruth's oak hutch. Frank didn't press her. Neither did Sadie. It wasn't until the third morning, when the fog hung low and clung to the porch rails like regret, that Ruth sliced it open with the edge of an old butter knife. Inside, a formal pre-settlement offer, confidentiality clause, no admission of wrongdoing, a low 5-figure payout for emotional misunderstanding. She folded it once, then again, then fed it directly into the fireplace, watching the paper curl like brittle skin in the flame. "We're not closing the book," she said to Frank, who was seated with his usual cup of black tea. "We're publishing it." By the following Friday, the Asheville Mountain Sentinel ran its weekend feature in bold serif font, "Protecting the Roots: How One Rural Grandmother Fought Back Against Silence." The byline was modest, but the photo wasn't. Ruth stood at the edge of her garden, worn gloves in one hand, the farmhouse rising steady behind her. No makeup, no bright lights, just her and the land that had outlived everyone's intention but hers. The article detailed her journey, not with names but with truths. Coercion, misdirected caregiving, gaslit medication errors, legal retaliation. It was quiet fire in ink. At Blackridge High, Sadie stood behind the podium at her senior assembly, papers trembling only slightly in her hands. "My grandma didn't just protect herself," she read, voice sharp despite the quiver. "She turned an attack into a platform. She turned being underestimated into being unshakable. And she taught me that silence is never safer." The auditorium was dead silent when she finished. Then it erupted. Meanwhile, at the Asheville corporate office of Consolidated HR, Tara's ID badge was deactivated before she stepped off the elevator. Her supervisor met her at the front desk with 2 security escorts and a printed HR memo. "Suspension without pay pending internal review. Allegations under criminal inquiry." Tara's face crumpled. Not rage this time, not deflection. Just the cold, flat realization that the show had finally ended, and no one applauded. In her car, she sat staring at the wheel for 10 minutes before calling Aaron. He didn't pick up. Back on the farm, Ruth swept her kitchen while the local news played softly in the background. "She wanted a seat at my funeral," she muttered to herself. "I gave her a bench at court instead." She paused to catch her breath and then laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in months. The kind of laugh that didn't rise from relief, but from resolve. She opened her front door and let the breeze roll through. The morning smelled like cedar and something earned. That evening, Frank sat on her porch reviewing documents, while Ruth trimmed a stray vine from the trellis. His phone buzzed. He read the message and looked up, expression shifting into quiet satisfaction. "It's official," he said. "The district attorney is moving forward with formal charges, multiple counts, elder endangerment, fraudulent coercion, and attempted estate interference." Ruth didn't flinch. She clipped one last branch and let it fall. "They're going to try to spin it," Frank warned. "Let him," she replied. "I'm done being dizzy." On Monday morning, a cream-colored envelope arrived in Ruth's mailbox. The return address was embossed in gold: North Carolina State Board of Elder Advocacy and Protection Annual Conference, Charlotte, North Carolina. Inside, a letter hand-signed. "We would be honored to have you speak on your case, your strength, and the policies you helped bring into motion. You have become a model for how the law should serve the aging population." The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and finality. Tara sat at the defendant's table in a beige blouse too crisp to be sincere, next to an attorney who looked as exhausted by her presence as the judge did. Ruth didn't watch Tara. She watched the gavel. It hadn't fallen yet, but she already knew where the sound would land. Judge Henley adjusted his glasses, the paper in his hand trembling only slightly as he read aloud. "Petitioner Ruth Elkins is granted full removal of respondent Tara Elkins from all roles of medical authority, estate access, and legal succession. This court finds compelling evidence of coercion, undue influence, and willful endangerment." He paused, then added, "A permanent injunction will be filed today, effective immediately." Tara didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She blinked once. Then again. Like someone waking up in a different version of her own story, Ruth didn't move. Back at the farmhouse, Frank Barlow clicked his pen 3 times, more out of habit than hesitation. "That's everything," he said, placing the final sheet in front of Ruth. "The trust now bypasses them completely. Sadie holds full successor authority, and the new clause for her legal education grant is built into the core, not a side clause." He leaned forward, eyes soft behind his wire frames. "You sure you want to name it after her?" Ruth nodded. "Not her name, her act." They named it the Elkins Endurance Grant. For those silenced too long, it would fund senior legal defense seminars, rural elder law internships, and provide small emergency stipends for at-risk elders fighting for control over their own estates. Sadie designed the logo herself, a silhouette of an oak tree with roots shaped like a signature. That night, Sadie found Ruth on the porch, reading the conference agenda by lamplight. "You really turned her cruelty into a classroom," Sadie said, sitting on the swing. "No," Ruth replied. "I just gave the truth somewhere to sit." They swung gently for a while, until the crickets took over the conversation. The following morning, a moving truck parked 2 houses down, just past the rusted mailbox that still bore Aaron's name in faded paint. Tara and Aaron loaded boxes in near silence. No goodbyes, no explanations, just a woman scraping her nails along the edge of a future that was never hers, and a man who looked like he'd aged a decade in a month. From the window, Ruth watched them go. The tires crunched down the gravel path, each turn of the wheel sounding more like punctuation than motion. At the end of the drive, the truck hesitated. Then the gate creaked shut behind them. At noon, Frank returned to the house with the final certified copy of the trust in hand, sealed in a fireproof folder. "That's the last of it," he said, handing it over. "It's clean, legal, tight as a drum. No one touches it unless she names them." He tapped the corner of the document, and she didn't. Ruth accepted it without fanfare. Her hands didn't tremble. They were hands that had given medicine, grown tomatoes, stitched fabric, written names, and now removed them. Just before dinner, Ruth found one more envelope in the mailbox. No name, no address, no stamp. Inside, a blank card. No handwriting, no apology, no admission. She stared at it for a moment, then slid it back inside and placed it under the leg of the porch table to keep it from wobbling. That was all, it was good for now. The smell of cinnamon and browned butter filled the kitchen, curling into the rafters like memory. Ruth stood by the old oak island with flour dusting the front of her apron, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. 4 girls from the county's youth center hovered around her, faces lit with sugar-high focus and reverence. "Real vanilla," she said, sliding the tiny amber bottle across the counter. "Not the fake kind. If you can't pronounce it, don't bake with it." They giggled, but they listened. That kitchen, wide-windowed, warm with decades of use, had once played host to whispered schemes and clinking glass, meant to mask intention. Today, it rang with laughter and mixing bowls. She showed them how to knead without rushing, fold without bruising, measure by eye and instinct. Not just recipes, but respect. Upstairs, Sadie hung something new on her bedroom wall, Maggie's affidavit, carefully framed in reclaimed wood. A simple brass plate below it read, "Truth matters." She didn't treat it like a weapon. She treated it like a mirror, so she'd never forget what people can try to erase and what can survive anyway. By sunset, Ruth and Frank sat out front with steaming mugs of chamomile tea. The air was thick with late summer humidity and the hum of crickets. In front of them sat a new bench under the porch eave, polished and dark, with a simple carving along the backrest, "Not yours to finish." Ruth ran her fingers over the lettering, like Braille, like gospel. Frank lifted his cup. "To outliving the intentioned harm," he said. She clinked hers gently against his. Travis pulled into the driveway in his dusty pickup, a carved wooden sign strapped in the bed. He'd done the work himself, one of the last remaining men in town who could still hand-chisel cedar clean. He set it down with a quiet grunt, then looked Ruth in the eye. "You got people talkin' in a good way for once." The sign read, "Ruth's house, no trespass for cowards." She didn't laugh, but her eyes softened. "Think that'll scare off ghosts?" Travis tipped his hat. "If it don't, I will." Back in town, the pharmacy bulletin board had a new addition between the free blood pressure screenings and local bake sale flyers. It was Ruth's article, the open letter she'd written for the newspaper, framed in plexiglass and posted with the bolded title, "What Happens When We Don't Protect Ourselves, and What Happens When We Do." Below it, Maggie had scribbled a note in blue ink, "Ask about our new elder safety resources." Because one of ours stood up, and we all saw it. That night, just as Ruth was closing the curtains, a box rested at her doorstep. No note, no sender. Inside, a glossy print brochure. On the cover, her face. She was seated on her porch, arms crossed, eyes forward. The caption read, "Rewriting the Inheritance. Legal reform starts at the kitchen table." She stared at it for a long moment. Not pride, not fear, just something deeper. Something earned. The grass had never looked so green. Ruth stepped onto the porch barefoot, letting the dew slick her soles. The morning sun spilled across the 17 acres like forgiveness, warm and wide, with no shadows hiding in the corners. A light breeze carried the faint scent of pine and the first ripened blackberries near the fence line. She walked slowly, deliberately, like someone unhurried for the first time in years. Each step across the earth felt like punctuation in a story she'd written herself, in legal filings and long-buried resolve. The gates were locked now, the house title clear, the names scrubbed clean from every future she'd once naively shared. She passed the "Not Yours to Finish" bench, brushed a leaf from its armrest, and kept walking. Inside, Sadie stood over an open suitcase on her bed, trying to make too many memories fit in too little space. Her college acceptance letter was tacked to the corkboard above her desk, beside Maggie's affidavit and a photo of her and Ruth at last fall's harvest festival. Her cap and gown hung from the closet door like armor. She paused, then scribbled something on a piece of linen stationery, folded it, sealed it, taped it under Ruth's favorite mug in the kitchen with a single word on top. Read last. Maggie arrived late morning with a mason jar of wild flowers and a 6-pack of lemon verbena tea. "I didn't know what to bring a woman who has everything, including her damn legal faculties," she said, placing the jar on the table with a smile that didn't try to hide its admiration. Ruth gave her a nod and a quiet, You saved more than you know. Maggie patted her hand. You saved you. I just provided the receipt. They sat together for a long time, saying little, sipping the tea. Around noon, Frank's truck pulled up the gravel drive. He stepped out holding a single manila envelope, no briefcase, no leather folder, just the final trust filings, neatly signed, countersigned, and witnessed. He set them on the table and said, "All done, Ruth. Every I dotted, every legacy preserved." Ruth leaned back in her chair and let the words settle into the wood of the farmhouse. She didn't reach for the envelope. She didn't have to. "I once thought dying with dignity was the goal," she murmured. "Turns out, living with it is a better one." Frank smiled. You lived, legally, loudly, and precisely. That afternoon, Ruth opened her memory trunk. Old lesson plans, newspaper clippings, and a faded photograph of her and her late husband the day they signed the original land deed. She framed a new quote and hung it beside the others on the barn wall. It read, "This legacy was earned, not inherited." She stepped back, dusted her hands off, and stared at the wall like a woman seeing her reflection at last. That night, the house held its breath. The lights were low, the kettle steamed softly on the stove. Ruth poured herself a cup of Sadie's lemon tea, lifted her favorite mug, stopped. A note was taped beneath it. She peeled it off, unfolded it carefully. Sadie's handwriting was crooked but clear. "Grandma, you made me believe that surviving isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a louder one. I'll make you proud. Love, S." Ruth read it once, then again. She tucked it in her breast pocket and walked to the front room. The porch was quiet, save for the hum of crickets and a rustle in the tree line. She didn't feel hunted anymore. She felt holy. She took one last sip, leaned back in the chair Tara once tried to place her in, and smiled.